All right, we're on. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Board of Selectmen for February 28th, 2017. We have a short agenda and open session tonight, and then we have a longer session and executive session. So we're going to spend about a half hour talking about our budget with our town administrator. We have our town accountant present and our chair of the school committee, and we're also joined by some observers from Troop 3, Boy Scouts at St. Mary's tonight who are observing. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
Welcome.
All right, would Mr. Walker and Ms. Dexter like to join us at the table? Should we start with everyone?
Sure, yeah.
We'll turn it over to the town administrator.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair, Board of Selectmen. Appreciate you having us here tonight. So we spent the better half of last night going over the last bit of the non-contingent budget with the Warrant Committee. I know they have a bit of deliberation to go early tomorrow night before we present our contingent budget summary. Again, very similar to what we presented on January 10th to the Board of Selectmen. This is a preliminary budget summary. Just to bring everyone up to speed, we met with department heads today, schools, fire, police, library, public works, and others to go over some of the priorities in the contingent budget. I think we one of the starting points in one of the documents that I passed around was the last two operational overrides. If you want to take a look at them, the last operational override took place in June of 2009 for FY10 in the amount of $3,420,189. There were approximately 8,400 votes, 8,500 votes, and it passed by 598 votes. 54% yes, 46% no. And on this list, you'll see the breakdown as to what town departments got what percentage and the dollar amount that went with it. Page 2 has the FY07 override, operational override, which was 2.411083. So a little over $2.4 million. It passed by 1,000 votes. Roughly 8,400 votes were cast. 56 yes, 44 no, and the breakdown of that budget, of that override, with dollars and percentages accountable. So it kind of gives us a ballpark of what the last two operational overrides look like from a dollar amount, albeit 7 and 10 years ago. 11 years ago, fiscally. But it gives us a ballpark to start. The town accountant's done some work and received some paperwork from the department heads who were tasked with yet another homework assignment of prioritizing what they had asked for in the contingent budget. We have asked Mr. Walker, chairman of the school committee, here tonight to speak to some of the distinctions in his department and as the committee chair as to what the school department would prioritize. So I think I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Walker, first, and then we could go through the town side after, or?
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
The approach that the school committee took to the contingent budget was to first think about some key themes, if you will. Those were improving academic achievement and sustaining academic excellence. Second, expanding program offerings, and then third, reducing costs to parents and guardians. So each of the things that I'm going to talk about fall into one of those three categories. I should point out that the Finance Subcommittee has reviewed and prioritized the contingent budget request that we did. It's scheduled for a school committee vote tomorrow night. The initial request that we submitted to Town Administrator Dennehy was a $1.9 million request. We have prioritized that request into 3 tiers. I'm only going to talk about the first tier, which totals about $1.1 million, since I think for the roughly the size of the override that we're talking about, the likelihood that the school's going to get any more than that is slim to none. So These are actually in prioritized order. At the very top of the list is 2 FTEs math specialists at a cost of $125,000. The rationale for that is quite simply that we've experienced extraordinary success with the reading specialists that we put in place about 3 years ago with the advancement budget. The improvements in reading levels have been dramatic, so we're trying to replicate the same model with the math specialist. The 3 challenges being reading, math, and science, so we're looking to bolster our efforts in each of those areas. The second is a $20,000 item. It's the restoration of the vice principal at the Pierce Middle School. We took a cut 2 years ago in which we reduced the vice principal position to a dean. That saved us some money, but what we found out was that in terms of effectiveness, that really wasn't the best move. Specifically, the assistant dean couldn't take part in observations or evaluation of teachers, so that left the principal of the Pierce Middle School, which is a pretty large staff, as you might know, having to do all of those evaluations. So vice principal has that authority, can do those, and interact with parents in a way that the dean couldn't. So $20,000 to restore that. Same individual, no add in positions, but restores them to the vice principal level. Third is the inclusion of an inclusion specialist, 1.0 at a cost of $62,500. The inclusion specialist that we have one now, has had a very, very important effect in the special ed area. This is the individual that works with teachers at each level to figure out ways to integrate our special education students into the regular education environment. We've had good success there. As you might guess, one person trying to handle that for the entire district is a very large task, so we would propose to add one of those additionally. Next, and both of these, I should point out, are kind of mirror images of the cuts that we're making, simply trying to avoid any impacts or lesser impacts on direct classroom instruction. But in our non-contingent budget, we would have to eliminate an inclusion specialist, the one that we have. Similarly, with the instructional technology teacher, with the increasing pace of technology and our ability now, with the help of the support of the Selectmen, the Warrant Committee, the MFE, the Copelands, we have made some significant infrastructure improvements. We've got many more devices. So the good news is that our students have access to the technology they need. The bad news is that in order to keep pace with that, we've got to make sure that the teachers have the skills that they need to effectively use that technology. This individual works with those teachers at every level, again, to help them get up to speed in terms of their skills and their thinking about how to best use technology in lesson planning. Fifth would be at the Tucker teacher support in grades 1 and 2. That's 1.5 FTEs at a cost of $93,750. The Tucker is the only school that receives Title I funds, but in an interesting quirk of federal regulations, lost over $100,000 in Title I funds. We had been using those to bolster the academic environment there. The Tucker has the most challenges in terms of proficiency gap. Their scores on some of the tests are not where we want them to be. So the idea there would be to add 1.5 FTEs to try to create much smaller class sizes at grades 1 and 2 and hopefully bring their skills up more quickly. Next, at the Glover and Tucker, increase the SPED staff in grade 4 co-taught. That's 1.0 at a cost of $62,500. The co-taught model is a model where you have a regular education and SPED teacher. It's worked fabulously well. The regular ed teachers and students love it. The special ed parents and students love it. The idea there would be to increase by 1.0 the teaching staff there. I think right now the SPED staff is a half-time. That would allow them to be a full-time at both of those schools. Next is elementary assistant principals, and that would be 2.0 FTEs. It would be a half-time FTE at each school. We had a slightly different budget process this year where we asked the parent councils to come in earlier in the year. Normally, their presentations occurred in the spring, and what we found was while they were able to talk about their accomplishments, one of the questions we always asked them was, do you have the resources you need? And we got answers to that question, but it was after the previous budget process and too early for the coming budget process. So the big idea we had was invite them early enough in the year so that they can talk to us during the budget process. One of their priorities was assistant principals, and the thinking at the elementary level, again, is that when you have a school like the Collicott that has over 700 children, the ability of the principal to do the observations, do the evaluations, interact with parents is limited by what one person can do. So the thought is that if we add a half position in each of those elementary schools, each of those principals gets the additional support there. And frankly, if you have two people who are working with teachers, doing observations, that should improve the quality of instruction. Next is reduce the bus fees by $100 at a cost of $46,000 for that. Next would be reduce sports and activity fees by half. That would be at a cost of $130,000. Those obviously are in the category of reducing costs to parents and guardians. There are two sports I should point out that might not be affected by that. Those are swimming and crew, and that's because the arrangement we made with those parents and advocates when we approved those sports was we would approve the sports so they could participate in the conference, but we allowed them to charge the fees that would sufficiently cover their costs. So they will probably need to continue to do that, but all other sports and activities fees would be reduced by half. Next, at the high school, restore a guidance counselor. The current ratio, this made the little bit of hair that I have stand on end. The ratio of students to guidance counselors is 1 to 250. I don't know what it was like when you guys were in school, but when I was in school, I actually met with my guidance counselor quite a bit. So you could do the math and figure out how many times, if a guidance counselor met with a student every day, how many times during the year they could meet. So the idea there is obviously to just try to start to bring that ratio down. So that would be a cost of $31,250. Next, we're all concerned about class size, and I know that's a particular concern of Selectman Burns. Restoring the English teacher would help to start to address that class size issue. That's at a cost, 1.0 FTE, cost of $62,500. Next is the addition of an adjustment counselor for a transitions program. You may have heard something about this, but in many school districts that we looked at, they have what they call a transitions program. It's a program that's designed to work with students who are returning to school either for, they've been out because of social emotional issues, family issues, medical issues, sometimes athletic concussions. What we found and what the research says is that putting those students right back into the full-blown education environment is sometimes problematic. So what this would allow is that those individuals would be working with the guidance staff and an adjustment counselor to kind of ease that transition. Sometimes it might be only a week or two, other times it might be a little longer with that. But the idea is to have some kind of program in place that helps those students to readjust. Next, professional development at a cost of $100,000. I think that speaks for itself, but what we're asking teachers to do in terms of technology, in terms of inclusion, as I talked about in special ed, in terms of different thinking about curriculum and teaching, all of that requires professional development. It's not fair to ask teachers to do those things and do them well without giving them some development in that area. And then finally, at the elementary level, the purchase of the English Language Arts core curriculum, which speaks for itself. The idea there is we're always trying to keep pace with ensuring that our curriculum is updated every few years. This is an effort to do that in the elementary English language arts area. That would be a cost of $80,000, and that is a total of $1,099,650. So, as I said, it'd be great if we got $1 million. We probably won't, but whatever amount is allocated to the schools, it would be allocated in that order. So, math specialist was number one, and the rest that I read go from there.
Okay, thank you. That's good information.
Great. And if approved tomorrow, could we get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
That's great, thanks, Laura.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Appreciate you coming in. Amy, do you want to walk through some of the town side stuff that we talked to the department heads about today? I know there's some positions they have identified in our preliminary discussion on January 10th. The number was 16 or 17 full-time employees. We're certainly not looking for 16 or 17 full-time employees with the priorities that were given to us today. But we can walk through. We'll probably start with public safety and walk through some of the stuff that came through.
Do you want me to go, or?
Yeah, if you want to start, I can jump in and just add some of the detail.
So as Michael mentioned, we've met with the department heads numerous times, the latest being this morning. They were tasked with putting together a list of impacts if they were to receive funding for their contingent requests. So the town departments exclusive of the schools and what we considered shared departments contingent request was about 1.8 million above the non-contingent request. We were able to summarize today by, not department, but by branch of government,
Sector, yeah.
public safety, general government, boards and committees, and whatnot, but we didn't get to prioritize those within the total yet. We didn't receive all of the information. But in public safety, well, as Michael mentioned, if everything were to be, if all of the requests were to be fully funded, it would be about 16.5 full-time equivalents. But we are going to go through the list with the department heads to trim that back, to really determine which ones are critical need. So we are not expecting the request to be the 16.5. So I just want to be really clear on that. That is the need, and we are all very aware that the town at this point would not be asked for 16.5 on the town side. Within public safety, inspectional services is requesting a code enforcement officer. That was a request prior year. I think that's pretty high on the wish list, on the priority list, probably number one. That code enforcement officer would do things like inspect properties. I can't explain.
Yeah, we had a pretty good discussion here last week
Yeah.
about what that person's role would be. Joe Prondak was here and talked about how inundated they are at the desk processing the permits. This person would be out on the street, as we said last week, taking a look at the blight and trying to make sure that the property in the town is properly maintained and looks good going forward. Ultimately, that could be some type of revenue generating stream with some legislation that would follow. In Boston, they had success with the green tickets, which are the trash tickets, and they could attach them to the tax bill, ultimately. But this is more just being proactive in our community and someone that's out there in the street, so that Joe's inspectors can inspect buildings, wires, et cetera, and the permits and all the hard work they do behind the desk there can get accomplished. It's a very busy place, so that would be a number one priority on the town side.
Okay, and then that's a total cost of about $52,000. Also in inspectional services, they're asking for a very minor increase in their general expenditures. A lot of the departments are asking for that. It's not a lot of money, it's more inflation-based. So I'm not going to talk about that on
That's
every-
good. For purposes of time, why don't we omit those small expense lines?
Fire department, they're asking for 1 lieutenant position plus what we are now referring to as backfill staffing wages. I think this term overtime that's been used
Right.
is very confusing to the public, and it sounds as if it's a luxury, and it's not. This is wages, a wage appropriation needed for when fire and police are out on paid leave in order that they can maintain minimum staffing levels. And then some general, so per Chief Grant,
Yeah.
the priority there would be the backfill staffing wages. He said the lieutenant would be on his last priority. So that's one place where we're looking more to fund that backfill line more than ask for a hire. So
Okay.
more than likely that lieutenant would drop off. And please, the request there is for 2 patrol officers. That has been, those 2 positions have been approved and unfunded since I've been here, I think anyways, at least 3-4 years. I didn't exactly go back, but if you had heard Chief King's testimony last night, he's running at very low patrol officers on the street, and by filling that, that would help with managing that backfill staffing line item. On general government, information technology is just requesting that their general expenditures be funded at a higher level in order to keep up with the pace of changing technology, to be able to do replacements when needed rather than defer them.
Yeah.
Law, maybe Katie, you might want to speak to this, but law is requesting an additional $75,000 for airplane
Well,
noise
for
mitigation.
increased litigation costs,
Yeah.
and increased legal costs for a variety of different, I think we've
Yeah,
covered
that's-
that at some of our other meetings,
Okay.
but that's, it's not for any one particular
Okay.
issue, it's for just increased general, and we have some cases that are pending relating, one of them is a Randolph Ave 40B case, so.
Okay,
just
so that's my
general
mistake. Okay,
legal costs.
misinterpreted that.
Amy, if I could just jump down to the town clerk. So we talked in the non-contingent stuff about departments that are just too small to cut. And we didn't even venture towards the town clerk's office when it came to cutting the 20% or 35% as we worked our way through the warrant committee process. But this position for the senior administrative clerk that they're talking about will really bolster the clerk's day-to-day operations with the public records legislation that was passed. This would be another priority of ours, along with, as we work through the list with the 2 patrolmen and the code enforcement officer. It's about $46,000. It would generally supplement the day-to-day operations down there and really take some of the pressure off of the FOIA and the freedom of information and public records requests that we're getting, and that, quite frankly, we have to respond to within 10 days. So I think that's a very important position.
And then just while we're on town clerk, the $15,000, that's for permanent records restoration. That's a 10-year plan that's also a request under the capital committee. So that's an item that could probably fall out of the contingent request as long as the capital committee considered funding that in the future with free cash. So that, in her department, the senior admin clerk would be the priority. I'll let you talk about selectmen's office,
Sure,
Mike.
yeah. So there was funding asked for assistant town administrator. Obviously, Paige Eppolito does a very good job as assistant TA. Most of her day is covered with human resources work. It's time consuming. FMLA, crew time, collective bargaining agreements, stuff like that encompasses most of her day. And I think this position here would bolster the group we have in the office. Just to bring that office up to 2017 speed. Jumping down, and that's $85,000, $84,258. Jumping down to boards and committees, again, another department we didn't wave the wand with when it came to cuts and the non-contingent side, which I think is a very valuable tool for our aging community in Milton, is an outreach coordinator. Nancy Stewart does a great job over there currently. I believe she's not on a fully funded work week now.
So she's full-time, but only 10 hours a week, I believe, of her salary are funded through the general fund. This is the net cost of a reorganization to eliminate one position, upgrade it to an outreach coordinator, and then use the grant fund paying part of her salary to do other outreach and work through that department.
And again, we're kind of focusing on some of the personnel that will ultimately lead to a more efficient government in the town. You heard Joe Lynch's testimony last night about the amount of work that goes into fixing equipment and keeping all the public safety and other vehicles on the road, the necessity to have crews in on Saturday because of that. I think the master mechanic, which is requested in his contingent budget, it's 37% of the cost goes to the general fund. The rest is written off into the enterprise fund. But that master mechanic position would ultimately pay dividends right away. It's one of those positions that would end up paying for itself in a relatively short amount of time. The premium you pay to sub vehicles out to get replaced, and the opportunity cost of not having vehicles on the road. I think that position itself is one of the top priorities on the town side as well. We also have a conservation agent. We spoke to the town of Randolph. They have a conservation agent that does 2 days a week for them. We'd love to share that asset. Apparently the woman used to work in Westwood. Westwood got rid of, either hired a full-time or eliminated the need for a half a week. So Town Manager Murphy and I have sat down, and this is a position that we could share with the town of Randolph to help supplement some of the conservation work in the town. You want to jump to Board of Health, Amy?
Oh, could we just say one more thing?
Sure, yeah,
about
sorry.
Public Works. The 159, I'll be honest, I ran out of time, and I didn't get a chance to dig through his budget to determine what the increase in general is. But I think worth noting is that there is a $250,000 request for roadway improvements within the DPW budget. I think through the capital committee work, as well as discussions with the DPW director, and everyone's aware that funds are needed to work on the roads to try to get them. This is not near enough to get us what we need, but it's a start. And
now, the only thing about that is the idea here was to fund a special purpose stabilization fund. This may have to go in a separate override vote, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it can keep it within the same, but because the idea is to memorialize it
right,
in roads, not have it morph into
right,
something else,
right.
3 or 4 years from now. So we'll have to talk to town council about that, the best way to,
Okay.
if we're going to keep
Can we
it.
try to go quickly through the rest of them? Because I know
Sure.
we want to have more of a general discussion, and we're up on the half-hour mark, and then we do need to move into
Yeah,
executive session.
just moving through the sheet, and some of the departments we weren't able to speak with today, we certainly will before we present to the warrant committee tomorrow night. But if you flip to the next page, obviously there was a lot of talk about the non-contingent budget in the library, and how cutting resources at the library would be very detrimental to what has become a gem in our community. Will's already been approved for 2.5 of these positions. The reference technology librarian, the reference librarian, and the library assistant. I think the passage of the override would allow not only the shortfall, which would, as his testimony said last night, would close the library on Wednesdays early and all Saturdays, which ultimately closes the library for weekends in the summertime for a 10-week period. I think by making up the shortfall and then adding these 2.5 positions to the staff over there, you could see you can see the library as vibrant as we've ever seen it. I mean, there's days when people have to circle the lot to find a parking spot in there. So we all know how important the library is to our town. I'll just skip cemetery and parks for now, only because we didn't get to speak to Trace Dedman or Dave Perdios about their stuff this morning. But consolidated facilities, Bill Ritchie was in on our meeting again today, and I know you spoke to him afterwards for a short amount of time. Amy, do you know where his priorities were on?
I think, no, I don't. I think no, I don't.
Okay, last night he
Yeah.
did mention the craftsman
Yeah.
and how important it was that.
He'd be
that-
happy.
Yeah, he
If you at
spoke
least
deliberately
got
about the
one.
craftsman, you know, and
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
cost savings that we will attain over a number of years having him as opposed to having to go out.
To continue his success
Correct.
with minimizing the costs that the town faces,
Right.
so.
And then,
Yeah,
can I just make a comment on the 100,000?
Yes.
Historically, over the last 3+ years, we've been funding building repairs and maintenance in the consolidated facility budget with free cash. This is an attempt to acknowledge that as an operating need so that he doesn't have to keep going back asking for it. I think that would be a huge benefit to that department also.
so, sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Just one quick question. I mean, with all, both between the school side and the town side, it's adding, again, depending upon where we cut it off, is adding positions. I don't see that we burden those positions with, what do we have, about a 38% employee benefit on average?
Well,
I mean, if we put all these things on, we've got to be able to lay the employee benefits on too.
so we've increased the group insurance budget by $300,000.
Is that in here?
That's on the summary page, because that's a shared department.
Oh, okay,
That was
okay.
just an estimate.
Gotcha. All right, that's fine.
Not everybody will take family coverage, not everybody will take coverage. So that was an estimate. I think it was based on maybe,
270 grand, okay.
it's about 18,000 for family coverage per family. So I forget if I did 13 or how many people I did, but I did them all at family. And then I figured once we see what the number of FTEs are, we could go back and revisit that number to see
Okay.
if it
All right.
still made sense.
That's fine.
Yeah, we have a department head meeting tomorrow, so we'll refine a lot of these numbers and come up with a more truer presentation.
Okay.
But that's the starting point. Obviously, we switched gears overnight from the non-contingent to the contingent, so it's been on our radar, but we're starting to identify the priorities. Again, I want to thank Mr. Walker for coming in and his testimony.
Should we bottom line it? We have a $1.5 million shortfall in the non-contingent budget. The contingent request, and it's just request, that not all of this will be funded, is 3.9, which brings us to a total request over our revenue of 5.4 million.
Right.
So that's the number that we were talking about in January as the starting point, and we said clearly at that time, we're not talking about a $5 million override. That's just what all of the departments have requested, and again, not all of it will be funded. I know in talking to Mr. Dennehy, he's looking to us for some kind of guidance as in terms of what he'll present tomorrow night to the warrant committee in terms of what the range of a contingent number probably should be, if we have any preliminary thoughts on that at this time. Anyone on the board have any comments on that?
Preliminary, and again, when you talk about these things, it's kind of gut feel as to what might be palatable and what might not. I mean, gut feel tells me something under 4, that 4 may be a magic.
I would agree with that. We certainly want to get up to 4.
I agree with that as well. I think, though, that, I think that the number has to be good enough so that we're not coming back to it
That's
so soon.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that,
That's true.
both the schools and the town, I think, our residents deserve the services. They expect those services, and I think both groups have done a fine job, articulating this. So I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of, anywhere between 3.3 and 3.6 would be palatable, in my opinion.
Which is in line with the 2009.
Right.
No, right. I mean, it has been 8 years since we've had an operating override.
Right.
We've been able to forestall it for a number of years, but we're as we said last night, the budgets are in pretty dire shape in the non-contingent budget. So we're looking at the shortfall there, and then what can we restore? I like the word Mr. Walker used, because on our side, we're restoring, some of these would be new requests, but some of them are restoration, and the patrolman positions, and the zoning enforcement officer, the licensed craftsman, those are some that we've been hoping to fill the last couple of years, and I think
it's
Michael and Amy have set out good reasons why we need them.
It's important to realize that this affects every resident, no matter what age you are, and, whether you have kids in the school system or not, or, it's services that, sometimes you take for granted that, then you realize. So, I think that's a pretty good number, somewhere in between there.
Okay, so that hopefully gives some, at least the board's thoughts on where we might be headed to Mr. Dennehy and Ms. Dexter while we will work forward tomorrow and into the next couple of weeks with the warrant committee and the school committee to try to patch this together.
Great.
Yeah, I
Anything
guess
else?
what I'd be looking for going forward is from Amy and from Mike, is to kind of prioritize this list a little more as to, which of these expenditures will have the most impact, and kind of do it from that perspective, most impact to least impact in terms of services and value to the town.
Yeah, we're trying to maximize the efficiency, the mechanic's position, the code enforcement officer, obviously the clerk downstairs. Those are positions that should pay for themselves over time, and they're not a burden on the taxpayer. It's something that improves the efficiency of the town, and keeps the vehicles on the road.
Yep.
Stuff like that, but yeah. So we will do that. We'll prioritize them from a town side, similar to what Mr. Walker did on the school side, and we'll come up with a number and go from there. But thank you for your guidance tonight. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the,
Just
thank you
one
for the
other
work.
point to Selectman Burns's point about trying to ensure that we're not coming back right away for another override. We had talked about some sort of contribution to a stabilization fund. I guess technically there are some problems with including it in an override. We've done a little research there. But the thought is, how do we ensure that we put some money in reserve to perhaps bridge the operation shortfall the following year? Tom, you're the expert on this.
I agree with you. I mean,
I think we're referring that question to town council as well, aren't we?
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we are.
But I think,
But ideally, you want stabilization funds to be funded as an operating expenditure, not with one-time money.
Right.
I mean, one-time money is great, but, when it falls out of the sky at you, but
right.
Yeah, I do see that in the 2007 override, there was $100,000 dedicated to the reserve fund. 4% of the 2.4 million was dedicated to the reserve fund, and some employee security benefits of nearly that amount that same year. But I don't see it in the FY10 override, but just a snapshot in time.
All right, is there anything else from anyone at the table? No. All right, then, thank you all very much. And I'm going to move that we enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing strategy with respect to HD/MW Randolph Avenue LLC versus Town of Milton Board of Appeals Housing Appeals Committee, number 2015-3, and discussing strategy with respect to filing litigation, believing that having such discussions in open session would have a detrimental effect on the board's litigating position, and to return to open session for the purpose of adjourning.
Second.
Mr. Burns?
Yes.
Mr. Hurley?
yes.
And myself, yes. So we are now in executive session. We will have a meeting of the Governor Stoughton trustees after this, but that will also be executive session. So we are now in executive session.